This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Tuesday. How's everybody doing today? The number of ounces of silver need to buy an ounce of gold now at near 30-year highs. Silver is now bargain price when compared to gold, and it's a perfect time to protect a portion of your savings with silver. And at Silver Gold Bull, they have a wide variety of best value silver for every budget. Simply text or email Graham for details. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to precious metals, he'll work with you to answer all your questions and recommend the best products to meet your investing goals. If you're on silvergoldbull.ca or .com, you scroll down in the show notes, find all the links there. Just remember, any purchases you make to reference the Shaun Newman Podcast. While you're stocking up on precious metals, you might want to take a look at some firearms or some accessories that go with said firearms, and that's where Profit River comes in. You can check them out at profitriver.com. That's their brand new, it's been there for a while, but they have updated the website here in the recent months, and it's got basically a bunch of new features, plus they've made it easier for all of you, the customer. They're trying to make that easy to navigate, and any purchases you make sure to put in the coupon code SNP. It's going to get you in for monthly draws, and you can win some cool stuff. And if you're interested in, finding out more, you can also contact Joel. He's the primary contact for all you lovely listeners. You can reach him at smp@profitriver.com. Once again, profitriver.com. They are the major retailers of firearms, optics, and accessories, and they serve all over Canada. That means if you're sitting on the West Coast, the East Coast, you're up in the Northern Territories, they can get you firearms there. Just reach out to them. You can stop in store, you can give them a phone call, or you can hop online. RecTech, for over 20 years, they've been leaders committed to excellence in the power sports industry. If you haven't stopped into the west side location on Lloydminster, west of Lloyd, when you come in, lots of people, I keep reminding myself, I don't know, it's you who tell me this. We got the border markers in Lloyd, but RecTech has become, since they've been with the podcast so long, they've become kind of this unofficial border marker. And I always ask, did you stop in? They're open Monday through Saturday. If you haven't stopped in and seen their showroom, it is, they've done a beautiful job on there. And they got everything from pontoon boats, the Sea-Doo pontoon boat, which is pretty sweet, to Lund fishing boats. I was just in the multiplex here in Lloydminster. They have a side-by-side hooked up to a Lund boat in the lobby. And it's funny, the kids are playing on the side-by-side, but the dads were looking at the Lund fishing boat. I'm like, isn't that fitting? When you go into in-store, that is, they got snowmobiles, lawnmowers, side-by-sides, quads. They got everything. And they got the top of the line. They got the Lund fishing boat, which is the Cadillac of fishing boats. So stop in today, Monday through Saturday, or visit them at rectechpowerproducts.com. Planetcom, when you're busy running a growing business, trying to stay on top of the ever-changing world of information tech can be overwhelming, to say the least, and they want to take care of that for you, leaving you to do your thing and them to do theirs. For 22 years, Planetcom has been here to boost your productivity by proactively managing every aspect of your IT infrastructure, both in the house and in the cloud, and that ensures you're not too tangled up in technology to get anything done. If you want to see their handiwork, just go to the ShaunNewmanPodcast.com. Of course, my ShaunNewmanPodcast.com was taken. It is now, it has been for a while now, a Chinese gambling site. And to every lovely person out there who is like, have you tried getting it back? Well, I tell you what, these guys did their best to try and get it back. It is gone. So we built a new one, the ShaunNewmanPodcast.com. You can check out the website and see Planetcom's handiwork. And if you want to see more of them, go to planetcom.ca. I just had a new week in review come out this week. Of course, Substack is where you find that. If you become a paid member, you can see all the behind scenes of the new studio. There's a full-length video in there walking through the new studio. So you become a paid member and you can see all the behind the scenes. If you're not worried about that, it's free to subscribe to. You can get the week in review, which is just a summary of all the guests that have come on each week. A nice, I think this past week's was a 3-minute video, and it just brings you up to speed on some of the guests that have been on. And it, I don't know, it's become a pretty big hit on Substack and with the people who follow it. And if you're not signed up, what are you doing? Sign up. It's free. to sign up for Substack. It's down in the show notes as well. If you're wanting to get on the value for value wall, that legacy wall in the new studio, well, you can join a whole list of characters. I just updated part of what's on my phone. Chuck Prodnick was in town for the tree work bee where we did up some trees, cut down some old trees, cut up a couple that had fallen over in a windstorm. Dean Amandrew had brought over a bobcat, so shout out to Dean for letting us use that. Brian Hayden had a industrial wood chipper come in. Dale Paul ran the bobcat for part of the day. Jen and Rhett Fountain, Troy Clark, Mark Labacane, Badlands Coffee Co., Jonas Hagel, Robbie Cashel, Ben Rutherford, Joe Rutherford, Theo Rutherford, Jen Rutherford, Ken Rutherford. Yeah, the Rutherfords coming up in spades. Harley Mason, Newman, Ayla Newman, Casey Newman, Mila Newman, Jim Henderson, Cam Grabowski, Jamie Sinclair, Warawa, Robert Villeneuve, Dallas Zimmer, Kirby Cohen. The list goes on. Kevin and Ralph Damon. Like, there is just a ton of people that have been putting their names forward here. Jason and Tara Anderson. Seth Bloom was out over the weekend or over the work bee. So if you're interested in getting your name put on that wall before it's too late, shoot me a text. We'll see if we can't find some different ways to make that happen. And if you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, I don't know about YouTube these days. I don't know. Am I even allowed to upload yet? It's been a wild world there. Not really. More of the same from them. But if you are listening, I'm just checking out Substack. So we're up to Spotify. We're up to 409. So we're over that 400 mark. I'd love to see it just keep going higher and higher. If you're listening on Spotify, there's a ranking system for stars. Rank me 1 if you think. Rank me 5 if you think. Wherever you put me, we're sitting at 4.7 out of 409 people who have ranked me, and I'd love it if you'd help there. If you're listening, make sure to rank the podcast. It helps, and would love for that. Anywhere else you can do it, please do it. Okay, that's enough for me. Let's get on to that tale of the tape. Today's guest is a Canadian journalist, lecturer, historian, and founder of the Canadian Patriot Review and co-founder of the Rising Tide Foundation. I'm talking about Matt Ehret, so buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Matt Ehret. For those waiting for Matt Ehret and EM Burlingame, he couldn't join us today. So he had some issues on his end. So it's me and you today, big fella.
All right. Okay. Sounds good. No, it's all right. It's okay.
I was asking you here like 10 seconds before I click record. I'm like, I'm just going to click record because we'll end up sitting chatting for 20 minutes on all the things we could be chatting about. One of the big ones is Carney. I know your research has taken you down some rabbit holes on that. But then, of course, you brought up Putin and Trump meeting in Alaska. And I haven't had anyone talk about it, even Tom and Alex. We never got into that. We got into the Trump saying that they should charge Soros and his son with RICO and down that rabbit hole a little bit. And so I'm like, Matt, if you want to pull it in a direction, you just pull.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, well, I think it was a pretty interesting historical choice to select Alaska of all places in the world to have this very important meeting. And we are at a moment so Alaska, especially from a Canadian standpoint, has extremely high value for especially those who are sensitive to the deeper, often underappreciated, but very, very causal sort of nexus shaping our entire history of why is Canada. What is up with this strange configuration that you and I have talked about for the past 150 years since the British North America Act? Like, why are we a monarchy with a privy council and all this stuff? You can't understand any of that stuff unless you look at the strategic reasons why Alaska was sold by the Russians to the Americans back in 1867? I think it was like March 1867. And when you get into the mind space of global geostrategic thinking at that time of world change, you start seeing that there are certain things that are being recaptured today. Potentially, it could be there's a lot of good, a lot of valuable a potential for a world of harmony that picks up where we left off 150 years ago, or it could go sour as well. So you know, I wrote a book called In Defense of Manifest Destiny on the Untold History of Canada series back in 2013, and I republished it in 2019, where I zeroed in on why Russia saved the United States, right? When America was about to be destroyed in the midst of the Civil War that had a lot of City of London, a lot of Wall Street, a lot of Canadian banks and deep state actors who were working to break up the Union through Civil War back then. It was specifically Russia that came in, and Tsar Alexander II was an admirer of Abraham Lincoln and vice versa. They were both known as the Great Liberators. Both men at the same period in 1860 had freed the slaves. Alexander II was 25 million serfs who had been held under feudal control were freed in Russia. And that was just a few months before Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation that released the 4 million bonded slaves, black slaves in America as well. And both of them were very aware of the subterfuge of global, British intelligence operations with their fifth colonists in Russia and in America. Both of them had a very, very good familiarity with that. Russia had just gone through their own British-French trap that nearly destroyed them in the Crimean War of 1853 to 56. And that was the period that Alexander II came in and realized how these old bloodlines, these old princes and family, like higher, I don't want to call it higher, but these oligarchical families in Russia had worked to basically bring about a disastrous outcome, let's just call it that, by expanding Russia into the weakening Ottoman Empire. And that was a trap that was set by the British. So they had a pretty big familiarity. There was a cleaning house, a cleaning out of the swamp that Alexander II and his reformers brought into motion. And the same thing was happening with Lincoln, who had understood very well the Wall Street skull and bones type of operations that had worked to destroy America from within by breaking it up around the slave, no slave dichotomy. And he survived. Both men survived their own assassination attempts. Both of them had a common vision of a world beyond empire based upon cooperation and this more Christian idea of loving your neighbor, working with trust of other civilizations that would benefit through building big projects. So Russia sent their whole battle fleet. I mean, Alexander II in 1863 sent the Russian battle fleet, the Navy, to New York and San Francisco with orders that if Britain or France militarily openly engage on the side of the Confederacy, then that would mean casus belli with Russia. And that was enough of a disincentive that kept those imperial powers out from it, at least on an official level. They were still supplying military and financing and logistical support to the Confederacy, but they at least weren't going at it with the 10,000 troops in Canada who were not deployed to go and fight Lincoln from the north, which did nearly happen. So that turned the tables in a large way, and then Lincoln's system was so successful and admired that it was applied in Russia in the wake of 1865, and also in France, in Germany under Bismarck. You had it being done also in Asia.
So sorry to interrupt you, but this is going to bug me because we've talked about this specifically, the Russian fleet coming over, and if people go back and listen, you could probably hear me with relatively the same amazement. I'm like, I never learned that. Now I've heard you talk about it. I'm like, I've gone and done a little bit of research on it myself. I've read some of your books, and I'm like, that's wild. I don't know if you'd ever told me, or if I just, who knows, maybe one in one ear and one with the other, that Russia owned Alaska. I didn't know that. So you're saying it basically, and like 4 years after all this is going on, roughly, what you're talking about, in 1867, the Russians sell Alaska to the Americans.
Yep. And that was an amazing maneuver that had been carried out by the surviving Lincoln Republican Secretary of State, William Seward. The negotiations had already begun when Lincoln was still alive, and Lincoln actually gave a speech at his State of the Union in December of 1864 that people could still read the transcript of, where he calls for the extension of the transcontinental railway that had been begun in 1863 in the midst of the Civil War. And the idea in Lincoln's mind was to extend that northward through British Columbia into Alaska, across the Bering Strait. And he has a whole speech on the Bering Strait telegraph and rail line that was to be connected. And he also included rail connections down through Latin America, through Central America, connecting north and south on that front as well. So he was thinking very globally. He was not simply thinking in a localized perspective. And unfortunately, he died. I think it was, I want to say April. But anyway, he died into his second term just a few months in through an operation. Again, I talk about this. There's been books written about this from British Canada, British Confederate intelligence operations that were active in British Canada, sent down Wilkes Booth and a whole team, a whole network, some of whom were hung, some of whom escaped. So though Lincoln died, and many of his enemies ended up taking power, as is often the case around Andrew Johnson, his replacement, his vice president, who was a pro-Confederate, pro-slave asshole, who basically gave all of the powers back to the slavocracy, except, they couldn't stop the abolition of slavery, but they basically gave all of their political, their territorial, their possessions and other powers back to the slave power to regroup and rebuild, especially with the Albert Pike, who was the Scottish Rite Grand Master, who founded at that very same time the KKK, the Knights of the Golden Circle, as a new paramilitary unit that grew and grew to try to undo the damage of the Emancipation Proclamation. But Seward, the Secretary of State of Lincoln, who survived his own assassination attempt that very same night Lincoln was killed, he was stabbed like 20 times. But he went right back to work, and he began to pick up where Lincoln left off and finish the negotiations to sell Alaska for like $7 million. That was finally completed in 1867.
$7.2 million in 1867, roughly 2 cents per acre.
Crazy, eh? Crazy.
He
was attacked for that.
Man, understanding history and learning about, that's my fascination, on this side. I had a degree in history, right? Like, I just love learning about these things. And then I'm always shocked at, like, how little I actually know. I'm like, I'm a complete moron. But, like, if I do the timeline then, like, British Columbia becomes part of Canada in 1871. So that would have been a big push to make sure that they couldn't. I think it was Peter Scholz. Forgive me, folks. You've had Peter on, correct?
He's amazing.
And it's funny. Oh man. It doesn't matter. I'm thinking about something else. I was like, I should have invited Peter on this. Anyways, best laid plans. Back then, he was telling me when I had him on back then when I had him on earlier, that they built the railway to cut off the U.S. roughly. And maybe I'm butchering this a bit, but when I look at the timelines of BC coming in, that means BC could have been a part of the States too. And I assume there would have been a ton of conversations going on around that. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, there was a massive BC annexation movement. And I read about that in, I think, the third chapter of the Untold History of Canada, Volume 2. Yeah, the BC annexation movement was massive. And BC, people don't often... We take for granted when we look at a modern map and we're like, oh, that's the way the world always has been. And it's like, no, all of the current contours and borders and boundaries of nations is part of a state of flux, right? They're very volatile. And if you just go back to that period of the 1860s, really before 1870, when Rupert's Land was, or 1869, when Rupert's Land was sort of nationalized, BC was a small little, it was a big colony, but it was a colony that was broken off, separated by like 2,000 or more kilometers of privately owned Hudson Bay land, aka Rupert's Land. And then you had the 4 separated colonies on the East Coast, Nova Scotia and Upper and Lower Canada, Quebec and Ontario, or little parts of it that later grew. And there was like not a lot of an economy there. The entire reason why there was an economic growth period in the 1840s, 50s in BC was because there was a gold rush. But a lot of it, like this always goes, it became a speculative bubble, which did pop. It wiped out economies, wiped out savings in those ghost towns. People were in a bad place. The only economic activity that they actually had was with San Francisco. That was the only economic communion that these subjects of the British Empire had any consort with. They had no hopes of having any communion with the East Coast colonies. the empire didn't really care about them so much. And so there was a lot of desire at a certain point to survive and get the economy going again. And the only thing going was the prospect of Lincoln's robust rail system and nation building strategies that were going on after the Civil War had ended, which were transformative. I mean, this is the first time any nation in the world, any continent, became connected from sea to sea. It had never been done, and that's how the British Empire was able to project their power for so long with a tiny island. It's not easy. You got to do that by keeping every member of the game board as dependent on seaports and exports and transport by shipping of the seas, which the British had a dominant monopoly of by and large, and especially by controlling the choke points, 12 dominant naval or maritime choke points. They were able to control the entire world game. The whole game theory system was able to be managed by a very small coterie of British intelligence operatives far across the ocean. So with Lincoln, the idea was, okay, let's have a national credit system with the greenbacks. Let's build up the internal capabilities of the nation so we're not dependent on whoever is monopolizing sea lanes. And let's do that with rail. And rail is so great. Like Peter Scholz has such a good understanding of this, that it's qualitatively transformative. You build a rail through an uninhabited or lower developed region, and within a short time, people who have you create new industrial corridors, you create new cities, you create the means, the educational powers in undereducated people who now will be the engineers, who will work in the factories, who will be the designers, to make that railroad function and everything that goes with it. So it's so much bigger than just simply the shipping system is really just based upon, extracting wealth, bringing it to a port, sending it out like to another country. It's not really, doesn't have that transformative power. And so, the annexation movement, it really grew, and they filled out two petitions in 1867 and 1869 calling for the British to basically sell British Columbia to the United States. Seward wanted it so badly, Secretary Seward, and he even had a fight. And so did Ulysses Grant, the man who became president in 1870. And both men were fighting. With the case of Grant, he was fighting to make sure that Britain would be exposed for providing military support for the Confederacy, which was illegal considering that they declared neutrality during the Civil War, but they had openly provided hundreds of warships to the Confederacy, and that was illegal. And Grant proved that it was illegal in The Hague, first international criminal court of this kind that found Britain guilty. And Britain was like, let's just give you some money, and let's just let bygones be bygones and try to build up our Anglo-American friendship again. Just forget the past. And Seward, who had organized the sale of Alaska, he's like, no, we want Canada. We want the whole freaking thing. Because they understood that this is a major liability. The British had been using it to undermine and undo the American Revolution since 1776. That was the geopolitical purpose of Canada. Grant was supportive of the idea of it not getting all of Canada. He wanted British Columbia because he saw that was what would connect Alaska that the U.S. had just purchased. Ultimately, it was subverted, and it was subverted through the murder of a certain governor of British Columbia, who I was surprised to discover. He was a member of the British Civil Service, an Irish governor named Frederick Seymour, and he was governor from 1867 to 1870. And it became recognized by Johnny MacDonald, who was trying to get British Columbia to join Confederation. Right, Confederation was 1867, just a little bit after Alaska was sold, and Seymour was trying. He was trying so hard to buy time so that the annexation movement operatives, people who represented the majority of the merchants and even the popular opinion of British Columbia, he wanted to buy them time so that they could culminate this joining into the United States. And at a certain point, when Johnny MacDonald realized what Frederick Seymour was doing, he had him murdered. He basically sent him off to the Arctic to deal with some two warring Inuit tribes, and then within a week he died, and then Johnny MacDonald got one of his assets, Cosimo de Amore, to replace Seymour, who then expedited British Columbia's joining of Confederation and canceled any hopes of BC joining the USA or being a line to extend rail from the USA into Alaska. So yeah, it was a crazy drama.
It's I don't know why I've never really thought about this. When you learn about North America as a whole, I guess you got the Spanish involved, you got the French, you got the UK or the Brits, and then of course you get the creation of the United States, and then that causes a whole kerfuffle, and on it goes. I don't know why I'm like, how did I miss this? Or maybe it just never gets talked about. How Russia would have been on the top portion, and like when I just quickly Googled it, it's like 1776. Oh, sorry, not 1776. 1784 roughly is when they land in Alaska, and how many years after till they actually have a portion of it settled and everything else. I'm sure you can rattle off some details, but like you would have had Russia. Well, you had all the major nations on North American continent, sorry, which is kind of wild, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean,
you can just imagine the shenanigans that are going on as they're trying to solidify different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there are these. There are these historic currents that, like, for me, the way I try to reconstruct my history, because I know that history is written by the winners, so I can't trust anything I'm being told about the narratives of why things happen from the mainstream history books. But then it's like, well, how do you try to reconstruct something more truthful, right? One thing is that I picked up along the way was try whenever possible to go to source material to see who was making policy, what did they say or write, and then read that. And then you'll find that what experts say about the thing on Wikipedia or an encyclopedia or whatever is usually either stupid or an outright intentional lie most of the time about the big things. So in this case, you're right. Like I as well was shocked when I began to like look when my attention was put to this question. I was like, why isn't this like the first thing you learn in school? Like, this seems like the reason why everything else happened. This
Canada,
is why.
Yeah, Canada would have been a border of Russia.
Yes.
Right. And
exactly.
I understand we never really understand how close Russia is to us. Right. We never just seem to piece that part together. But Canada would have bordered Russia.
Exactly.
Isn't that why? Am I the only one that thinks that's wild?
It is super important, and even today, like many Americans don't even realize that the closest land, American land, to Russian land is separated by like 4 miles. It's the big and the small Diomede Islands. So between the Bering Strait, which is about 100 kilometers, you got these two little islands. One island is Russian, one island is American. They're the big and the little Diomede Islands, and they're only like 4 miles apart. You can see Russia from America. They're touching. And that was a point brought up by Vladimir Putin as well when he had met with Donald Trump a couple of weeks back, was this yearning, this clear simpleness, this obviousness almost when you think about it, to connect these like seeming rivals who saved each other in so many important moments, right? Like the idea that America and Russia are these natural rivals is a very new and artificial idea that just cropped up after World War II. Most of the time that America's been around, Russia was seen as its best friend and ally. It was, Tsarina Catherine the Great, who was the architect of the League of Armed Neutrality, which was partially her, but also Benjamin Franklin. But it needed Russia to work. That created an entire league that provided the weapons, the means, the munitions, the trade, so that all of the American fighters of the colonies had the support that they needed in order to carry out this war against the biggest world empire, the British Empire. And it was, again, Russia that carried that entire weight during the League of Armed Neutrality. Without that, the American Revolution would not have succeeded at all. And it was, at another time of crisis when Russia was in desperate need of economic development. They couldn't get it elsewhere, but it was America who came in the 1830s and 40s and helped Russia build the first rail line that Russia ever had between St. Petersburg and Moscow by George Washington Whistler, the brother of the painter, who was the dominant rail engineer, a friend of John Quincy Adams, who himself was the ambassador to Russia during the War of 1812. And they had a really, really good alliance and a good understanding that they had a common enemy, that enemy wasn't just England per se. It wasn't that. It was this oligarchy that was operating above nations that were using these noble so-called self-professed families with, fifth columns embedded within all of those countries. The US and Russia alike both shared the exact same enemy within that was loyal to this old system of empire that goes back to the ancient days of the Roman Empire. And they had at different times leaders that emerged that were able to organize, to fight off and to drain that swamp to varying degrees. Many of those leaders would tend to die, unfortunately, but they were willing to for the sake of this higher morality. Like Lincoln and Tsar Alexander II both got murdered by operations that have been provably tied to British intelligence. Same thing for Lincoln's followers, James Garfield, 1880, who got killed same month that Tsar Alexander II died. He also got killed by an anarchist. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. When we started this, let's just go back and forth, see where we get to. And where I thought we were going, we've gone complete opposite, which is never a surprise when Matt hops on. How important was the significant, or do you see any significance in them? Because you had Biden, who wouldn't even talk to Putin, right? Wouldn't talk to him. And then you have Putin now on U.S. soil, albeit on the far northernmost point of all of the America. What do you see out of that? Like, is there any significance in that for you?
Oh, yeah, it's a lot of significance, and it's very hopeful. I mean, these are two dominant nuclear powers along with China. I mean, the type of nuclear armaments that both Russia and America have together could wipe out the world several times over, or together cooperatively could end world hunger, could do so much good to end the system of empire and exploitation and poverty and all of those other bad things. This type of power block of truly sovereign nation states acting for the benefit of humanity and in opposition to this imperial system that's been latched on like a parasite since the days of Babylon, really. That's really good. Now, I mean, my hope though is that I have a little bit more faith currently in Lavrov and Putin and the intelligentsia of Russia as far as being honest brokers. I have less faith, though I am hopeful, that a patriotic sense of self-awareness and courage exists in and around the Trump circle. I certainly hope so. For me, I always get a bit nervous when I look at transhumanists, especially transhumanists with a lot of influence over military engagement and military power projection, which unfortunately there's no shortage of that with the whole Peter Thiel, Oracle, Stargate operatives that are seemingly very influential around the Trump administration, more than we even saw with Biden. So I'm hoping that the Patriot movement is solid and is able to join up with what Russia has brought to the table as far as like a paradigm premised around large scale development, long-term thinking, and using the power of the nation state to really take down this financier oligarchy. Russia's not been able to do it yet, but I think they've a much more solid grasp of that. But definitely, I mean, it's so important to start trying to defuse the bomb. The other bad thing would be the other negative scenario would be if there's many people like Keith Kellogg has said this. There's been a number of leading members of the current American administration who have said that their ambition is to try to do everything possible to weaken the Russia-China alliance, which they see as being a strategic threat to the security interests of the rules-based order. So my fear would be that there's an effort to try to seduce Russia to, again, weaken its relationship with Iran, with China, which is sort of the bedrock of the BRICS of the Eurasian Economic Union, or the Greater Eurasian Partnership. And if that happened, that would be a dishonest way of going about it. That would possibly be more destructive to humanity in the long run. But I would be more favorable if we get some complementary, harmonious thinking based upon the idea of getting a U.S., Russia, China, Iran alliance going, based on finding points of common interest economically, especially also in space, space mining, exploration, things that are going to be like really big in scope that breaks us free of this
Can
idea of scarcity. Yeah.
Can I give you a surprise?
Yeah.
This is gonna be a surprise. This was not planned by me, I swear. But welcome in, Peter Scholz.
Hey, no way.
How's Peter doing? Can Peter hear us?
No, Peter cannot hear us.
Peter,
No,
you cannot hear us.
He's looking at websites. He's got many tabs open, I can tell.
Well, Peter, we can see you, but I guess I'll remove him from now.
How did you get Peter on? Is he just last minute?
He was supposed to be on this morning.
Okay.
And then my day has been my day has been a crapshoot today. Peter, can you hear me? He's looking at his phone because I just texted him. This is funny. You
can't hear.
We can hear you, Peter. Anyways,
yeah.
No, but I'm like, I don't know if this is what a good podcast host does, but I was supposed to have him on, then I had to cancel it. Then Ian Burlingame canceled. I'm like, what the heck is going on with today? My whole day is just shot. And I'm like, you know what? I'll just see if he's around, because I'm like, this was scheduled. He was scheduled, but I had to cancel that to move here. And I'm like, well, let's just throw a little spontaneity into this, shall we? But
I really hope he locks in. I want to get some updates on his Aurora rail, or I guess the Athabasca rail now. I'm not sure what it's called. Hey, Peter.
Peter, can you hear us? Peter cannot hear us.
Damn.
All right. Well, we'll leave him alone.
Right.
The whole thing. I just wonder if there, I assume Trump knows the history of Alaska being Russia. Like, I didn't even put that together. Of like, would that be any reason to have it in Alaska, or it's just a nice meeting point, kind of secure location up in the north?
Yeah, I mean, I hope he does. It would be a shame to have the poetry and irony of that location lost.
I agree
on Trump.
But you didn't read a headline that says, "Oh, U.S. Russia meet where they've had friendly ties going back to the purchase." You don't. I didn't read a single thing like that. I didn't see a single thing on that. Did you? Anywhere did you see that?
No.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my entire listenership is going, Shaun, you're an idiot.
There's more.
This is common knowledge.
So there's more awareness of this in Russia than there is in the United States. So, I'm
muting him. I'm just gonna let him sit there until he figures it out.
Okay. All right. That's the best thing to do, I guess. And I'm assuming, he still can't hear. So. In Russia, they have a much greater appreciation for these aspects of our history. And like in Moscow, in the center of Moscow, there is a statue to this very day featuring Abraham Lincoln and Tsar Alexander II shaking hands. And the Russians see this every day in Moscow. This is like a really big thing. They have specials on primetime TV talking about the Russia-U.S. relationship of the 19th century. It's a common occurrence. It's just very present. Their textbooks talk about that. It's a point of pride. And I know this because I'm often asked to speak on Russian TV and Russian events, and this is just something that's common sense. And they're shocked that Americans are not aware of this. Forget about Canadians. So, it's no, he still hasn't figured it out. Okay.
No,
there's got to be a way. There must be a simple answer to this problem. It's just he'll figure it out.
But even that, right? Like even that, I don't like sticking on the Russians get this. You just understand how important media is in getting a message out, right? Like, I mean, you're saying there's a statue of Lincoln in Russia.
I'll see if I can get it. Yeah,
like I'm like,
yeah. There's a statue of Lincoln and Tsar Alexander II in Moscow. Here, I'll try to find it here and just show it. Alexander I mean, people could Google it too. Statue.
We're talking about Russia and the U.S. and their history, and a lot of it I had zero clue, including the fact that Russia owned Alaska and sold it to the States. I just didn't. I don't know. I guess I'm in a hole and I don't know things. I don't see that ever talked about. Like the fact that Russia at one point is next door neighbor to Canada.
Yeah.
Do we ever talk about that? Okay, and here is the statue. I'm going to pull it
Yeah,
up on screen.
There it is. So that's it. I mean, even though these two men never met in person, there is an appreciation for the common strategy that both had participated in. And this is featured again. This is for if you missed that, Peter. This is right there in Moscow, and it's been there for a number of years. And it's just widely understood in Russia that this happened. This is a strategic moment when Russia saved America and brought in American engineers to build the Trans-Siberian Railway, with rail cars made Baldwin locomotives made in Philadelphia that were cruising across the expanse of Russia in 1905. This is like something that most Americans just have no clue. It always comes as a shock, and Canadians obviously as well. So yeah, we're just talking about that.
Well, I learned a lot from you. I mean, I knew about the Alaska Purchase, but why would Russia sell this giant piece of land? I mean, the standard history we get is, the Russians were short on funds and they needed money because they lost the Crimean War, so, but then it's like, why are they selling this whole thing for $6 million?
Yeah.
I mean, the version of history that I was taught, that I believed until 8 weeks ago, and I'm still puttering on the side, is that those crazy uncivilized Americans just had this brutal civil war. They killed 1 million people over 3 or 4 years. Then the next thing they do is they purchase Alaska. So what does Canada? What do the provinces do? They merge so that they can keep out those dastardly Americans from conquering from the Northwest. And now Matt is shaking up everything I understood. So I don't have a lot of expertise to add here.
well, this whole thing started by him just saying it, that the U.S. purchased Alaska. It was almost in a passing. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? I'm like, we've talked about the North a lot. I just didn't think that had ever come up in a chat. And if it did, it went in one ear and out the other, because I didn't pick up on it. I was just as shocked the first time I talked to you, Matt, about, Russia coming in to ensure that the Civil War essentially wasn't taken over by the Brits. I mean, is that
and the French. I mean, Maximilian, was it the second or something? And he was an asset of Napoleon III, had French troops stationed in Mexico ready to also give support openly to the Confederate South from that direction. And then you had British troops stationed in Canada waiting for orders to go and, invade Lincoln from the north. So you had all of this going on. It was boiling. So the Russian entry into this thing, and Alexander II gave an interview with Wharton Barker, a leading pro-industrial banker who had his own newspaper, and published this interview where he said it out loud. Like, I had orders to the entire all of the commanders of the Russian Navy who were sent to New York and San Francisco that it would be war with Russia against any colonial power that came in supporting the Confederacy. And Lincoln understood that and was so grateful. They had parades in New York and San Francisco for the Russian sailors who got off, and they were like the center of these celebrations. And there's like photographs and etchings even today.
So could we say the timing of this Putin and Trump getting together is maybe a signal on what's happening in the Ukraine, and how, like you're hearing here in Canada, we're talking, we just had Carney over there pledging another $2 billion. There's talks of putting maybe troops in, and you see these things starting to align where the Brits, among others, are all talking about putting troops and ground, and everything's amassing for Ukraine. And when you go back through history, what does Russia do in a time of need for the U.S.? They position in a way that say, if you enter, this is what's going to happen. Now, it's a completely different landscape here. But could I hypothesize that the meeting in Alaska between two of the most powerful nations on the planet is a signal to, I don't know, other NATO countries, like, be careful what you're doing here. Like, we're already in talks with them to try and de-escalate this, and we don't want to, the U.S. has made it, I think, pretty clear that they don't
That
want
is
a
one
part of this, but
interpretation,
maybe you two
and
see something different.
that is one interpretation, but I don't. It could entirely be possible. The other thing is, remember last time I was on the show, I talked about the China, Russia, Iran, Fortress Asia, and that the Americans were trying to whittle in at the cracks between those three big countries. Did you freeze?
No, we can hear you just fine,
Hello?
Peter.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
Yeah, we're there.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So anyway, the Americans won. The Americans won. The Americans. Okay, we're on. Okay, yeah. Sorry. So what's never talked about in the Western media is Israel has been supplying arms to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is in two pieces, one on either side of Armenia, and the little piece that no one hears about is Nakhchivan, which is next to Turkey. Turkey, by the way, while it screams at Israel and they're going to destroy Israel, is sending arms to Israel. So Turkey is selling arms to Israel. Israel is selling arms to Azerbaijan. Armenia is in the middle. Armenia is a very old Christian country. There's a little piece of Armenia that used to be just in a rural portion of Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh, and it's been Armenian for 2,000 odd years. It was included in the Azerbaijani Republic by Stalin for who knows what reason why it wasn't given to Armenia. Anyway, right before the Soviet Union collapsed, the Armenia and Azerbaijan got into war with this Nagorno-Karabakh, and Armenia basically absorbed it, plus so that they had a land bridge. They called it Artsakh, and Artsakh was declaring it independence. Azerbaijan got all these Israelis weapons, and about a year ago, they took over Artsakh, and they kicked out 250,000 Armenians. They're now moved to Armenia. And Azerbaijan is making statements about wanting to march all the way and conquer all of Armenia to include in a greater Azerbaijan. And who knows what they do to the Armenians, because the Turks already killed 1.5 million Armenians in World War I. Mm-hmm. So Armenia is only 40 kilometers wide. It's between two countries that are planning to kill them. So, and it was the French that convinced the Armenians. The French that convinced the Armenians. Sorry, my phone is saying I need that battery power to plug me in right now. To go away from Russian protection status. And for some reason, the Armenians believed them. And the next thing they did is that they had all these Artsakh refugees move in. Mm-hmm. 3 weeks ago, the Americans announced, we have a deal between Azerbaijan and Armenia where the Americans will control the border between Armenia and Iran. Iran and Armenia were friends, and Armenia and Russia were friends. Armenia and Iran are still friends. But now the Americans control the border between Armenia and Iran. What does that mean? They have cut off Russia to Iran. Okay, the whole idea of Fortress Asia has just been broken. And 3 days later, Putin says, okay, I'm meeting Trump. Is there a relationship? I don't know, but it sure sounds suspicious because the Americans are putting tariffs up against India because India is not, because they said, Indians, you may no longer buy crude Russian oil, refine it, and then sell it to Europe at a massive profit because you're still giving money to Russia. So now that Trump has tariffed India, and India is, they've got a lot more sway than Armenia does because there's 1.5 billion of them, but that's still going on. And so the Americans don't really care that they haven't succeeded in getting Vietnam to be wedged between, or the North Korea. They now have access to the Caspian. So is that part of it? Because at the same time, over in Ukraine, the Russians nearly surrounded Pokrovsk, which is the primary Ukrainian fortress town that's been in the Donbass. And the Russians actually entered Pokrovsk, and right after the talks with Trump, the Ukrainians have pushed them back out of Pokrovsk. So the Russians are covering half the city. So that was one of the rare circumstances where the Ukrainians pushed back against the Russians. So this is all going in the context of the Russians forming an alliance with the Americans, or the Americans playing all sides.
Yeah. I feel like there's a bit of disingenuity as well, where there's this face of well-wishing, good intention, especially on the front of Russia. The right language is being used, but at the same measure, there's not been much of an effort to cut off providing the weapons supplies, the medium range missiles, the Patriot missiles, and other things that the U.S. has been supplying both under Biden but also under Trump to Ukraine. So that hasn't really stopped. And I know that the Trump team told Ukraine you're not allowed to use these missiles, medium or long range, onto Russian targets. But what does that mean? How do you enforce those words when they're the ones who actually have those things? And then, as you pointed out, the Zangezur corridor, that is so vital to link up, the resource rich Caspian area to Europe through Azerbaijan and Armenia into Turkey and then Europe. That's now under the control of that vital link is under the control of U.S. interests. And does it mean that the north-south transportation corridor is sabotaged? No, it doesn't mean that, but it's a huge bargaining chip now that the U.S. can wield to Russia to say, well, look, we can easily stop this thing that's been 20 years in the making to connect, rail lines and transport corridors from the north of Russia down into Iran into India, which is like a huge vital like node of development. They could sabotage it more easily now than they could before, but might they offer, to not sabotage it if Russia does certain things? We know that there does seem to have been certain back channel negotiations to allow for the overthrow of Assad, which seems like top-down orders were given from the highest levels of the Syrian forces or certain operatives within it who told all Syrian soldiers to put down their weapons when you had a very small force coming in from Turkey, from Idlib, just a little while ago, which ended up completely overhauling and overthrowing the Syrian government and creating this ISIS-run nation, this pseudo-nation. Like, that seems to have been decisions made far outside of the borders of Syria. Could that have been part of these back-channel negotiations between the Russian side and the American side? I don't know. I don't have enough information, but it seems like possibly. Also, Iran's in a sensitive point, right? Like, their leadership, they got a decapitation of much of their qualified leadership from last year when Raisi was killed in his helicopter with the defense minister, or was the foreign minister, like just on the border of Azerbaijan. And that immediately brought in Pezeshkian, who's born in Azerbaijan. There's like this weird connection there I don't fully understand. But then also, like, their top brass, the most competent military leaders were all killed during the so-called 12-day war with Israel. So they're much more fragile in that sense than many people realize on multiple points. Even though there's this special relationship that they have with China, with Russia, it's not as solid as many people think.
When we're talking Armenia and we're talking this border, when you say the U.S. now control it, like, are we talking they landed 5 troops? They like, what did they, like, how are they controlling it?
There's a strip of land for Azerbaijan to build a highway in Armenia along the border with Iran, which is 5 or 10 kilometers wide. The right-of-way is controlled by an American company for a 99-year lease, which means anything going north-south automatically is going to have to enter the space controlled by this American company. I'm pretty sure this is part of the reason why the Russians have been making overtures to the Taliban, because the Russians are going, if we lose the Armenia connection, we need to get to the coast through Afghanistan or Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. And Turkmenistan is run by this crazy despot. Nobody knows whether he's going to do left or right from one minute to the next. So the Russians are thinking the Afghanis are preferable to deal with than the Turkmenis. What I kind of agree with Luongo on his interpretation is China, Russia, and the United States are not, they don't want to have world war, but they're carving out the next world order on what their spheres of influence are going to be. The Americans clearly want to have the Middle East in their back pocket, and the Russians would like the same, but the Russians are now on the defensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
That's
with
my
that.
interpretation.
No, I do too. I think that there's been a decision that's been made, even though, and you could show, Shaun, if you want, that just quickly the screen that I have up there. Yeah, that one, that's the particular corridor in discussion right now in that small little slip of Armenia. That's what a U.S. consortium, I think, has control over as a lease for about a century, or it's like 100-year control over this thing. So and if you look at the other maps, which I could show maybe later on, there's the north-south transportation corridor that had been begun in 2000 between India, Russia, and Iran, which accelerated in 2018. And it's a multimodal system. It doesn't just go through Azerbaijan. There's some ports as well in the Caspian, and some to the east of the Caspian through Kyrgyzstan but all that to say, that's the most vital node. So if that could be disrupted, it makes it really hard to make the whole thing work. You could stop it now.
Forgive me while it's up. Okay, I see
yeah.
Azerbaijan and I see Armenia. What is the little yellow chunk where the red line is that you see Armenia come down and it splits the two? Is that all Azerbaijan?
Yeah, you're looking at Nakhichevan. Nakhichevan is the second piece of Azerbaijan. It's on the other side of Armenia, sandwiched between Armenia and Iran. It's a leftover from the Soviet days when the Soviets were like, well, we're just making the boundaries based on ethnic majority areas. We're not worried about future independence because they weren't foreseeing the Soviet Union collapsing the way it did.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that there's the strategic thinking of the Eurasian leaders from 2013 onward, and I think the hope is still there, but it's really evaporating, was originally that the West could get our senses back together and recognize that it's not in our self-interest to go on the path of unipolarism and global dominance, and hopefully restore the idea of sovereign nation states cooperating on big projects. That is historically what worked to make us good. Whenever we didn't suck, it was because we're using, like, sovereign nation states were making decisions in the benefit of the people that would uplift both the private sector as well as the well-being of the whole. And I think that there were many offers made by the Russians, by the Chinese to work together from 2013 onward on all sorts of big infrastructure that could do these things. But I think with the 2022 special military operation that was begun, and there's a lot of evidence that it was really difficult to avoid it. It seemed like there was a mass casualty event being gamed out and prepared in early 2022 February before Russia did their invasion of Ukraine. That would have slaughtered a bunch of Eastern Ukrainians who were mostly Russian, and then blamed it on Russia. That was what was being put out in the media, a lot of think tanks. So Russia preemptively got in there, stopped that mass casualty event from happening. It would have been a false flag. But then, they made a lot of effort to try to create a peace negotiation in April of 2022. They were making really good advances on getting a peaceful resolution where the Ukrainians would agree to neutrality, would agree that Crimea should just be part of Russia now. They had their vote, the referendum, and they will not join NATO. And then the lead negotiator on the Ukrainian side came back. He thought he was going to get a victory party. He ended up getting killed. So that went to shit. And then a law was passed by Zelensky soon thereafter saying it's going to be illegal to talk to Putin. So that made negotiations even harder. But I think at that point, it became more clear that the new strategy was going to be to bring in the Orwellian sort of plan, like the George Orwell, carve up the world under an East Asia, Eurasia, Oceania type of Iron Curtain with two sides always at war for, under a system of controlled chaos. That I think became something that became more pushed on. And that's what I think, unfortunately, China and Russia are being pushed into a corner to accept the idea of just adopt your sphere of influence and prepare to fight for, a slightly longer game fight. But we'll call it multipolar, but we don't really believe it's multipolar. Ultimately, it's the word multipolar when it's being used by a Rubio or a neocon. It's more just a convention of a word. It's just like, we'll agree to this approach for now while we chart out a longer term path to destroy you later on down the line. That's how I'm thinking it.
I'm actually not as cynical as you. I think MAGA and Russia are not as, like, it's clear that the British are out and the Germans were out for full scale war with Russia. And they're willing to take whatever price is necessary. MAGA's not willing to pay whatever price it is. They're willing to give Russian control over, but it's going to be, Kazakhstan is going to be your sphere of influence. Maybe if Uzbekistan, if you're lucky, right? I think that's the difference in perspective. And the Americans aren't willing to spend millions of lives or the MAGA Americans aren't willing to spend.
MAGA Americans, no, I agree with that.
No,
Yeah.
no. So so Putin is going through that field. I got another interview scheduled that's taken a month and a half to get organized. But I'll just leave this question with you. Was it a coincidence that, remember we had the trucker in Canada, we had the trucker crash down or lockdown, and then the Senate stopped Trudeau from continuing the Emergencies Act. They forced Trudeau to lift the Emergencies Act, and it was like 90 minutes later that Putin began the war in Ukraine. I've always been like, boy, that was close. And was that a coincidence, or was that a trigger? Or, it's probably just a coincidence. But
I thought the same thing too, man. It's a great question. It's been hovering over my head for a couple of years.
We'll discuss, Peter.
I got a black box.
I tell you what, in 900 plus episodes, I've never had quite what's just happened here. But thanks for popping in for 20 some minutes and then hopping back off.
Take care. Goodbye.
See you, man. Jeff. Fun guy.
What a wild day today on the show, folks. That normally doesn't happen. Anyways. Okay, so just on his question, he's drawing a link to the Freedom Convoy, them freezing the bank accounts, then Senate basically saying, Trudeau, you need to end this. And shortly after, Putin goes to war with Ukraine. Is that what I heard there? That's what he was asking.
That's what I heard. Yeah. It's a set of anomalies, statistically unlikely that they would occur so close together in a time frame, and I have no answer for that. But it's an interesting set of anomalies, that's for sure. What do you think?
Well, I guess my question to you is how do they link? Like what? I guess I wish I had Peter here for a second because I'm.
Yeah,
like,
I know. You can't just plant that bomb and then walk
plant that bomb
away.
and then walk away. Here, hold this for a bit. I'm going to walk out. It's like, well, yeah, there's a series of events that happen there, but what is what are the things that pull it together to make sense?
Yeah, I don't know enough. I mean, I could. What I can talk to is that the Senate has been a bit of a thorn in the side, in some ways, a thorn in the side of those game masters from the Privy Council office who have been trying to sort of lord above Canadians and our nation, imposing policy from the top down. Because the thing with the Senate is it's unlike the House of Lords in England. It's not a life thing. But it's almost life thing. It's like you're appointed by who's ever in power. And it's a 25-year gig. It's a pretty solid gig. There's very little you can do to get fired. You're not up to vote. You don't have to keep your seat by saying something popular. So these are people who, despite being often, politically charged towards one or the other side of the uniparty aisle, despite that, are humans. And they're humans who are politicians not afraid of saying things that are unpopular because they have no fear of not being voted back into their office. So sometimes they'll, step out of line from from the master plan. I had some meetings, some very positive meetings back. Was it when I was working with the LaRouche organization for a few years, organizing conferences in Ottawa, from 2007 to 2015. And we'd have meetings with various members of parliament and give them a political briefing and, invite them to come to a political seminar. And I got to say that the best conversations I had and the most open conversations I had of enthusiastic politicians was in the Senate. Sometimes
I just watched, though, like here in Alberta, Charles Adler got appointed to the Canadian Senate, right?
Yeah.
And I watched that and I'm like, well, he's a human, for sure. Okay, check. But then, you go political motivations, and they could say whatever they want. I'm like, well, yeah, but they get appointed by Trudeau, and now Carney, I guess. And you go, do we have any thought that they're appointing neutral people that are going into Senate for 25 years? That don't go along with the plan? And I'm not saying Charles is an insider. I'm just saying it is pretty clear on his social media the way he thought.
Well, here's the thing. One of the most, and I guess I could say this now, it's so many years later, but back in 2012, 13, 14, I was having regular meetings with a particular senator who was a Chrétien, a Jean Chrétien appointee. And most of them, this is actually one thing I did notice in hindsight, is that most of the guys who really liked what we were saying and were open to bringing these topics up in Senate were Chrétien appointee guys. His name was Mac Harb, and he really liked our conferences, and he really liked our conversations, and he's super enthusiastic fellow, very very supportive. Anyway, Mac Harb was a senator, and he got annihilated. He got destroyed at a certain point, and I can't say exactly why. Was it because he was favorable to our messaging? I don't think it was just us. I'm not that egotistical, but he was definitely like walking his own walk, and he wanted Canada to be a great nation building country again. He didn't like the green agenda. He didn't like this degrowth thing, and he had a rational, pragmatic standpoint with a lot of connections to the business community, like a lot of connections to make things happen. And he got taken down with this very artificial scandal deployed against him by like CBC hacks that did like this investigative report, how he used like, I don't know, $20,000 of some taxpayer money towards like building an extension to his garage or something, and he'd like lost everything. And it wasn't just him. It was a couple of other, Duffy and somebody else too, a woman.
Well, you just said he was kind of against climate and kind of against, this depopulation thing. And I'm like, well, right there, you don't really need to say much more, do you?
I guess not, eh?
I mean, I don't know that,
but I never got people who are so open, like in their ability to vocalize
Sure.
their opinions in the parliament as I did in that environment. That being said, you're right. I mean, you're an appointee, and you're probably going to be you know who to ask like and why if you're going to be in that position more often than not. That's for sure too.
Okay, we've pretty much hit the hour mark into this conversation. This has been on the level of bizarre, and I don't mean bizarre in a bad way. Podcasts I've done. This is right up there. This is like we have been all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to talk to you about a little bit about Carney. And I didn't know where to steer that. And then we went into Alaska, and it's just led us all over the place to Armenia and everything. And I'm like, holy man, this is all over the place.
Can I?
Yeah. Fire.
Can I play the trailer for the Mark Carney video?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah?
You're it's just yeah. Share it and I'll bring it up.
Oh, okay. All right. Let me go pull it up here. I have it on X, and it says the sound is going to work. So it's now sharing on X. Do you see it?
Let's see. Here we go. Maybe.
Uh-oh. Why did it? That's my...
People are driving right now listening to this going, what are these two yahoos doing today? We're just having fun here, folks. I don't know where you're at. I don't know where you're at on a Tuesday morning, but happy Tuesday to you. You're in for a ride today with me and Matt Ehret. Like this is, I mean, we're all over the place, but we'll get the show on the road here at some point. I'm gonna pull it from the screen until you find it. You just tell me when you got it.
I got it. I found it.
Now he's got it. Okay, here we go.
Here's a clip. Here's a clip from the new documentary, The Dystopic Mission of Mark Carney, which people can now watch for free. Okay, here, I'll just play it with sound.
At the highest echelons of the Bilderberg Group, which orchestrated the Western systemic collapse, that citizens would likely rise up in opposition to the abuses of the Wall Street and London banking cartels. A distraction was needed. Thus, we shouldn't be surprised to discover that major controllers of the loudest anti-establishment movements today are directly affiliated with the same imperial controlling hands that carefully manufactured this world crisis to begin with. Take the case of the UK-based Extinction Rebellion, which has attempted to call for not only the total abolishment of major banks, but of industrial civilization itself. Leaders of the Extinction Rebellion have called for the total decarbonization of life on Earth, extreme forms of Green New Deals, and ironically, depopulation. All outcomes conveniently desired by Mark Carney and his associated technocrats in London. Just in case you thought Extinction Rebellion was somehow untouched by the hand of social engineers, Alex Evans, a leading figure behind the movement, was a former consultant on Prince Charles's International Sustainability Unit and co-author of the U.S. National Intelligence Council Global Trends 2025, A Transformed World, which became an environmental foreign policy blueprint for the Obama administration in 2008. Currently, Evans also runs the Collective Psychology Project, where psychology meets politics. Other leading British intelligence figures managing the Extinction Rebellion movement included Farhan Yaman and Sam Gale of Chatham House, the controlling institution behind the New York-based Council on Foreign Relations. Chatham House is overseen by its president, Mark Carney. How much of a rebellion can it really be if the rebellion is set up by the establishment? The oligarchs running the grand green design since the Club of Rome's Sir Alexander King began the Limits to Growth study in 1970 knew that green, low-energy flux density sources of energy would inevitably constrict global population. And that is exactly what they wanted. Sir Alexander King said as much in 1991 when he wrote in the preface of The First Global Revolution,
"In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself."
So you can watch that on YouTube. Yes?
Yep, you can indeed. As of yesterday morning, the whole thing is available with no paywall for free, 34 minutes, narrated by my friend Hugh Trudeau, and Jason Dahl is my filmmaking buddy who helped us put that together.
So manufacture a problem, come in and solve said problem.
That's the ancient formula. Yeah.
Yes. So when I draw you back to Carney, what do you see, Matt?
I just see the sort of embodiment of all of the problems of humanity embodied in one figure, I suppose. He really is that. It's almost, you couldn't make this guy up if you wanted to. And as far as like him just being a representative ideologically and also regarding the institutions that he oversaw of the power structures of the oligarchy, as far as how, those systems that it used and why it used those systems to apply influence over humanity over many centuries. As far as I just alluded to in that little clip, he was, up until the moment he became prime minister, the president of the Royal Institute for International Affairs that you and I have unpacked in previous shows, being the principal think tank of the Roundtable movement, the Rhodes Scholarship Network that was set up under the Rhodes Trust, the will and manifesto of Cecil Rhodes, the genocidal diamond magnate that ran Rhodesia, and who called for the creation of a new, well-organized form of mercenary technocrat that would be educated in the halls of Oxford with a special scholarship that would be, supported by his funds that he stole from Africa, basically, and then sent back to various parts of the world that would, that they could infiltrate whatever media, academia, politics, government, military, to then advance the agenda of undoing nation states, accelerate some system of chaos from within target countries, generally looking a lot like what was done to the United States in the 1860s. That is, civil war and economic calamity would just create a system of total ungovernability, and thus, out of the ashes of chaos, a solution could then be imposed by those who were lighting the fires creating the fires in the village. And then it was those same arsonists who were then ready and willing to then say, aha, the solution is get rid of those pesky nation states. Get rid of the idea of participatory democracy in society. Get rid of those expectations of freedom and just accept the fact that we're animals who can only do destruction if given our freedoms. And we always need stewards from above to impose order onto us. And maybe we'll be given some social credit, tokens or something to use to feed our families, which could always be taken away if we misbehave. So that's the sort of idea. And Carney was the head of that thing, the Chatham House that runs the Council on Foreign Relations. He's known as the eco-warrior of central banks as well. He took pride in that moniker. And as the architect of the bail-in regime, after being a leading investment banker for Goldman Sachs, one of the top gambling speculative investment banks in the world, he helped blow up the derivatives bubble and grow it to abominable proportions. So he helped advance this bubble economy in the first place, turning our economy into a weapon of mass destruction, a bubble which will blow. And then he started working in the Canadian Civil Service as deputy governor of the Bank of Canada, then governor, where he simultaneously oversaw the creation of the the bail-in mechanisms to ensure that banks had the authorization to confiscate savings, even pensions and mutual fund deposits, and turn them into bank stock the next time you had a systemically important, too big to fail bank that collapsed. He's the architect of that going back to 2009. At the same time as he's pushing and creating the infrastructure for the climate disclosures project, the entire idea of a Green New Deal or a new economy centered on a new system of values that would not be based upon shareholder values, because we see the destruction that unbounded shareholder value and profit obsession can lead you, which is what we've done for the past 50 years to ourselves. But now they say, okay, well, instead of that, we'll have it based upon actions which reduce the carbon footprint, reduce the amount of human beings you could sustain. And we're going to financially incentivize activities like building windmills or doing things that will ultimately reduce the means of supporting life. Oh, but if, and so that's what he's also been gaming. So this guy is just tied into this thing eyeballs deep on so many levels, and there's so much I'm even leaving out, but he's a problem figure.
He's a problem figure, he says. I sit there and I listen to all that, and I'm like, but we'll wait and see. Isn't that we'll wait and see what he does. I see my apologies to some of my conservative friends that Pierre's back in the lead in the polls, if you didn't notice, and that's great for conservatives. I'm like, great. So 3.5 years left of what Matt just said. I'm like, so buckle up, folks. This is going to get rocky.
Yeah, well, there's a lot, and I know we're rounding out the show, so I don't want to open up a door that's going to
open up a door. Feel free to open up a door. I mean, This show has been off the rails since we began. Happy Tuesday again. So you might as well just open up a door, and we'll see where it leads.
Just lean into that, eh? Okay. All right. So that's so yeah. I mean, looking at current geopolitics from this historic standpoint, based on what we were talking about earlier from the 19th century stuff and the shenanigans that created the BNA Act, what I can say is that Carney, there's a certain formula that Canada has been ruled by, which has been to be a nominally sovereign country on the surface, but with an absolute control or a near absolute control by an unelected class of operatives that are far removed physically from North America, right? And John A. Macdonald, who oversaw what I believe, honestly, I think I've got a pretty strong hypothesis, was the murder of Governor Seymour in 1869. And the absorption of British Columbia into the Confederation, the British Confederation project that succeeded where the Southern one against Lincoln's Union failed. The Northern one did succeed. He said something when he announced his national plan, the national policy in 1875, or 1870, which was that I would leave Canada a barren wasteland forever, though I know that if we do not go there, that is build rail to connect the East and the West Coast, then the Yankees certainly will, which is unacceptable. Alexander Galt, our other father of Confederation, said something very, very similar. So too did George Brown, another father of Confederation. All of them had the same view that unless we allow for a limited degree of development, Canada as a geographically strategic zone would be pulled into this pro-development U.S.-Russian alliance. That was inevitable. So there was a series of bribes, a series of murders. The Hudson Bay land was sold by an act of parliament to the government, nationalized to allow for more an expedited rail line development. And it was good that it happened in a certain, like, I can't say it was bad that we built rail. It was good. But there was a higher good that was being sabotaged by the intention to do it the way that they did it. And I sense that Carney's just done certain things, right? Like Bill C-5 has been passed that it's called the One Canada Act. He's just announced this, which basically gets rid of the trade barriers between provinces, for those who don't know. And that's been a big problem for Canadian development for generations, that we've never had provinces permitted to have free trade amongst themselves, which has made it very difficult to have a singular harmonized policy that benefits all Canadians. Divide to conquer. That's been part of what's held us back for a long time. So now that's gone. That's being removed. Okay, fine. That's being removed. That could be seen as a good thing. Carney also announced a $500 billion investment fund for upgrading all of our ports. He seems to be motioning as well for opening up for a certain amount of expanded development of natural gas, LNG and oil development, maybe raw materials as well, which there's a lot of raw material, rare earths especially, but also uranium and other things in Canada. Peter Scholz goes through a great assessment of all of the incredible untapped potential that oligarchs are certainly looking at, because they could see that Russia, China, they've rejected this depopulation agenda. A lot of the country, 80% of the countries or population of the world are in countries that don't want to go with this mass global Club of Rome kill-off. So they're instead going for pro-development, pro-industrial activity, which is different from what Alexander King, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and others have in their heart of hearts, and what Carney is committed to, or Maurice Strong. They're committed to a very different religious idea of, they religiously want to depopulate. It's not just a practical thing for them. It's also a weird, perverse, spiritual thing that smells like sulfur. So I think Carney, I'm getting a sense that he's doing a John A. Macdonald, or that he's been told to do a John A. Macdonald. On the one hand, build up a military economy, on the one hand, to fill the gap that's being left by the lack of anti-Russian sentiment from the new U.S. administration. So, Carney signed a deal with Australia I don't know what Australia has to do with this, but to help militarize even more the Arctic. Justin Trudeau began it, long-range missiles being one part of that. Also AI data centers for a technocratic management of society. The AI data centers in Alberta are a big deal. They need a lot of water as well for coolant and other things. They're very hot. So that's one thing that's being set up, is an idea of allowing for a certain type of development that uses all of the resources of Canada, hence the C-5 Act. He might allow for development, but they're trying to do it in a way that reduces the chances that type of pro-industrial development will benefit the civilian economy. So they somehow want to try to get the civilian economy that people live in to still be submerged under a mostly technocratic depopulation agenda, while at the same time investing in nuclear energy for AI mass surveillance, or for a military buildup that won't really benefit or spin off to the civilian sector, or for exporting resources like LNG and other things to Germany and to the European countries that are not getting it from Russia anymore. So there's that type of weird balancing act that Carney seems to be trying to get Canada into. I don't know how that's going to work out. It doesn't seem possible in some ways, but they think on a very fucked up level. And there's similar thinking in Europe as well, around Mario Draghi, who's a grand strategist, a former Goldman Sachs investment banker who worked very closely with Carney at the Bank of International Settlements, who's also put a similar strategy for Europe as well, to allow for industrial development, but only for the military sector, not for the civilians. For the civilians, it's still the eco-economy, the depopulation economy. So that's going on. Yeah, it's a balancing act.
I don't even know what to say to that. This seems to happen every time you come on.
Sorry, man. What Peter was saying, I also believe that the MAGA groups are like, the MAGA movement is anti-war for sure. It's pro-industrial, pro-development. It's the only thing morally viable in North America that I see are the MAGA-oriented conservatives who actually are not neocons, but real, just normal Americans that want a job, that want to avoid war, that want to just take care of our own business. That's good. We got a sentiment of that in Canada, but it's mostly in Alberta. There's something to work with there. And I think that I want to believe that Trump is principally motivated to accommodate that movement that he leads, and not when I mentioned Mark Rubio or Pete Hegseth with his Templar Crusader cross in his book calling for a jihad against, or a crusade against, the Islamic world and China. I want to believe that they're not the shapers of American foreign policy. I want to believe it's not the Peter Thiel transhumanist groupings around Oracle and Stargate that are shaping things. I want to think that they're maybe going with the flow, but there's something more honest and good. And I'm hoping for that, but I'm also prepared for the worst.
This is
too.
what's so hard about all this, right?
Yeah.
Is trying to disseminate like what's actually going on, right? I look at Carney,
yeah,
and everything you've just said before he was getting elected, I'm like, oh man, this can't be what Canada's going to choose. And, I have my thoughts on how he came to be, the prime minister and everything. But here he is, and he sits there, and you go, oh, well, he's dropped the provincial trade. Well, that is a good thing, right? Like, that's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
So you see a couple of good things, and you go, oh, maybe it isn't so bad. But then I go, did we not just listen to everything you just rattled off? I'm like, this is a guy that is tied into, like, could he be the sheep in wolf's clothing? He impersonated a wolf to get in the group, to get into power, to do all the right things. Is there the possibility that's the case?
No.
No.
Wolf is a wolf. It's gonna wolf, right?
A wolf is a wolf, and it's gonna wolf.
Yeah. Well, and that's what makes evil so freaking frustrating, right? Because it masquerades with a cloak of goodness so much, and a lot of those things on a mechanistic level that Carney seems to be setting the stage for, I also support. As far as building One Canada, using a Canadian infrastructure investment bank that he helped co-create in 2017. As a concept, it's a great idea. Have a special infrastructure investment bank that citizens can take out bonds in, that can work like a real national bank, like a Lincoln Greenback system, or like a Hamiltonian bank, or what the Reconstruction Finance Corporation did back in World War II, or the Victory bonds, that helped us defeat Nazism and build up our industrial power in the 40s. It's cool. I mean, as a concept, to do that in peacetime as well would be fantastic, so that we could really declare war on poverty and war on unemployment by building up high-speed rail networks and hydroelectric dams and nuclear power centers and things like that would be wonderful, wonderfully awesome. But intention is everything. And that's, I think, the biggest thing when looking at, the way I try to look at history is from the standpoint that conspiracies are real. They're not only real, but they're causal. Intent. And that makes, this is where people have been brainwashed to say things like, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, or that's not an academically acceptable way to speak or to write a paper, and you'll never get peer reviewed or keep your job if you allow for conspiracy theories. It's like, well, but everything happens by intentions and ideas put into motion by individuals who make free-willed choices to be a part of, or to not be a part of, a process that they were born into, and that they could choose to understand and act accordingly or not. And, that it's conspiracies for good or for bad that shape our lives and shaped all of history, right? Like that was what the whole sale of Alaska was. There was a broader conspiracy by really good, noble souls who are willing to die for their moral principles, but they had a very strategic and practicable, it wasn't utopian, idea of flanking systems of empire through mutual collaboration on great projects that were multi-generational and would benefit our great grandkids. And they had a vision, like Lincoln said, and he laid out the vision in his State of the Union address a few months before he died. And it could have gone better. It could have worked out, but you had artificial sabotage, his murder being one of those things. We saw the same thing with JFK. 3 weeks before he dies, he goes to the United Nations, and people can watch this speech at the UN in 1963 when JFK calls for a joint U.S.-Russian space program to get over the Cold War and the mutually assured destruction logic of game theory and accept a higher law based upon mutual collaboration and mutual creative discoveries of God's creation together, with the focus of the moon being one objective, but beyond that. And the idea of sharing resources, sharing science and technology, and sharing discoveries together would help over time build the trust that was being lost through the Cold War type of propaganda on both sides. So 3 weeks later, he's dead. But it's like he wasn't just going at it renegade by himself. Neither was Lincoln. There was a network on both sides who had a similar sort of understanding or faith that human beings were made for something better. And we had to act and strategize and conspire accordingly. That's what the American Revolution was all about. It didn't happen by just a bunch of farmers who didn't want to pay taxes. That's not what motivates people to do and to take the risks that they did, or to be successful against the world's biggest empire when you're a tiny, farming community. They needed the support of like-minded thinkers in Russia, Muslim revolutionaries in India, in like Hyder Ali, who was writing letters to the Continental Congress in 1780, saying your fight against empire is our fight, and recognizing that the question was humanity's liberation from systems of empire. The system.
What you're pointing to is a network of evil or dark or whatever you want to call it, versus a network that has a higher good. Is it? Can I say it that way?
Sure. Natural law versus defiance of natural law is how I think about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because I had Ben Trudeau on just recently, a few episodes ago, and we got talking about, he'd written a paper, and in that paper talks about the Pierre Elliott Trudeau and I've been butchering this, and I push people to go actually read Ben's paper, but regardless, what it talks about is the rise of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And me and you have chatted about this, and I don't know if I just did it. Reading something versus hearing something, Matt, is almost two different things. I mean, it conveys the same message, but seeing something written out, it just sat with me differently. And that was like, Pierre Elliott Trudeau had a magazine for 15 years, and in that magazine, he found all the disruptors of Quebec society and further up.
Yes.
And then he goes on to be prime minister. One of his guys working at this magazine became the head of the FLQ movement, which is like, they were, I don't know, what's the word you want to call them? Terrorists, maybe? I don't know. Just right. So, and you go, holy crap. So when you take something like that and use it for purposes of like transforming a nation into your own eyes, you have all these people that are just as into that as you. And he gets pushed up the ladder, becomes prime minister. The FLQ thing happens. He starts to know, Castro and all these leaders from around the world who are doing the same thing roughly. And I'm like, that's wild. That's his network, right? And we're talking about Carney and his network, and why, no matter what it looks like on the surface, just look at the network and go, they don't want what I want. Yeah. Like there's just no possible way.
Can you share the screen?
Yeah, you betcha. Yeah, here it comes.
Yeah, that's what Ben Trudeau was talking about. I gotta interview him. He's such a good guy. and he's got like firsthand knowledge of this stuff too. But that's the Cité Libre magazine he was talking about that Trudeau set up in 1950 when he was still working for the Privy Council, and he had just gotten back from the London School of Economics, where he was inducted into the Fabian Society, and he was an active Fabian. He had there were 5 Rhodes Scholars operating through the Privy Council that he was interfacing with. One of them was Escott Reed, who later on became the godfather of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But Cité Libre, it recruited all of these misanthropic, nihilistic, mostly Quebec authors to basically devote themselves to the cause of overthrowing Christianity in Quebec. And right there, you got like all of the key figures that came into power with him with the Liberal takeover after Diefenbaker was ousted. This whole hive moved from the Fabian Society political party, which was the NDP, that was officially the Fabian Society Party of Canada, but it wasn't going to get political power. The Liberals were that was the party that had the access to real power. So the decision was made while Diefenbaker was in power as the conservative, the progressive conservative, to do a full coup d'etat cleaning house of the CD Howe Liberals. And this grouping was inserted into power positions from 1963 especially. And you got like, Trudeau, René Lévesque was writing for it. His so-called enemy was actually a regular author for the Cité Libre, the guy who ran the separatist movement and gave an excuse to have martial law in Quebec. They were friends. Jean Marchand, Lalonde Gagnon was the guy who was in charge of the RCMP special unit that oversaw the Operation Gladio operations in Canada in 1970. Michael Pitfield is Pierre-Elliott Trudeau's shadow, and he later on set up CSIS when the RCMP was caught red-handed one too many times sponsoring and providing or a controlling hand behind the FLQ that had been, putting letter bombs into people's mailboxes and stuff. The RCMP, or the special branch within the RCMP, was caught red-handed so many times, and there were exposés in mainstream Quebec media that it looked so bad that this guy was assigned to create a civilian agency to take over the functions of what the RCMP had been doing. And that became CSIS in 1983, the same year that the National Endowment for Democracy was created under Reagan, to basically do what the CIA had been caught doing, overthrowing governments using the cover of democracy movements, but without the reality of it. And then they created the National Endowment for Democracy in 83 to do the same thing. And his son is still a handler was a handler of Justin Trudeau, a lifelong friend, and is still a big player in things. So this network is much better than the good guys. So there is good and evil. It's not Manichaean, but there is good and evil throughout history. And that's why the way I see it is like those who are good recognize the human thing. They recognize that that morality is not just something we feel that's subjective, but it is something which is it's a universal principle that we all are born with. And we could choose to have our conscience, that thing, shape the development of our thinking as we become mature adults, or not. Or we can choose to do the easier thing and eat the candy and not the broccoli and just give into junk food for the soul and the mind, and allow our identities to be shaped by something lesser, either more slavish or more abusive in that sense, and align ourselves with like-minded thinkers and institutions. Now, the bad guys are much better at creating multi-generational institutions. They're much better at conspiring. They're much better at wielding top-down power than the good guys. The good guys are not as good at doing these things. And that's an unfortunate, part of our experience as humans, is that it's frustrating to read this history and see all these beautiful ideas and conspiracies within a very short time, after little successes, peter out by...
They're very organized.
And then, just a few generations later, the sons, the grandsons of many of those wonderful leaders who are willing to die become kind of shitheads. So often, not always, but way too often. So yeah, the good guys have to get
it's
better.
Just interesting to me because I see, I just see on this, on this show, I just run into all sorts of different people. I just find lots of, I think, decent people that are trying to do the best they can in the areas where they navigate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when I watch and listen to more about Pierre Elliott Trudeau, I just see the rise of his network. And I wonder if we aren't in a position where we're seeing the rise of a different network. And far be it from me to say good or bad, just that there was a time where they weren't the powers to be, right? Pierre Elliott Trudeau was, running a paper, and I'm sure there's more to it than that. But, you see this rise of him to the culmination of him being prime minister and running the United States, Canada through the ringer and on and on. And instead of maybe there was a bit of a rise of a different network, but the two network thing makes a lot of sense to me. Like I just see that playing out right now, that there's a rise of a different network that's competing against that one with different ideas, different thoughts, different ways of looking at the world. And certainly here in Canada, if you come from the school of thought of the liberal side, you have mainstream media in your hand. Like that is what is pushing your ideas and your thoughts and attacking things. And there's a lot of stuff that gets misconstrued or they talk about misinformation, on the other side. Meanwhile, they're spewing an insane amount of misinformation and not doing great journalism. But you're seeing this rise of a different thing right now. And I'm just kind of, that two network thing is interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's this tension. And Martin Luther King has many sermons where he talks about, it's not an overly intellectualized manner, but it's a very truthful, I think, profound way of speaking that's very hard to hear these days, of the tension that shapes human history, shaped by good and evil, and that it's easy sometimes to get demoralized by the amount of injustice that has perverted so much of our history as a species, but to recognize that there is this higher, that even though injustice does exist and often overly thrives, that there's a higher power of justice that all of history kind of is ultimately bent towards in the long run. And we have to have faith that we're made for something, we're designed for something much more noble and dignified as a species at the end of the day, even though in our particular lives we may not see that outcome in its manifestation fully. But that I think idea is very important to keep us from becoming misanthropic, and to also give us access to a bigger spectrum of our creative powers that we would not have access to if we took on a more cynical hypothesis or a more misanthropic view of what we are. And I think people who are too anti-human, or who think that humans are just like pollution, or we're just naturally destructive by our nature unless we're reined in by some higher power, they have less access to their God-given creative powers of reason by virtue of that sickness that they take into themselves. And it's being put, this is what pisses me off too, right? A lot of young kids, if you look at the schools and what they're feeding young kids before their critical thinking is developed about, human beings are a global warming machine causing the destruction of nature, and they're getting kids to have like trauma bonding early on in like grade 2, grade 3, imagining that you're the tree. How do you feel now that a chainsaw is coming at you? Can you feel the pain of the tree? Can you cry with the tree? And I've seen like videos of these kids going through like traumatic experiences, which I don't know how you're going to recover from that as you grow up, and your mind is always going to be wired. All of the thinking, the choices that you make are going to be wired by that type of, this is what humans do. We kill Gaia, right? Like these are like little fascist overlords of the future if we don't like do something now while there's still time to turn this ship around. Like these kids they don't have a lot of hope in that sense if there's not some big qualitative changes for the good.
Well, and that's just, once again, the two networks working against one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
I like that thought.
Yeah.
Either way, appreciate you coming on today and enjoying the ride that today has been, folks. Matt, as always, appreciate having you on. We're going to try and get you and EM Burlingame on together at some point, but obviously when it works, So appreciate you coming on, and look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Me too. Take care.